Hi, I'm Shar Jorgenson and welcome to Inspired by Shar. I'm really anxious to show the quilt that I'm going to make to you today called Cleopatra's Fan. The first quilt that I'm sharing with you is the one that inspired me to create the templates for this pattern. When you look closely at this quilt, you'll see that it is an antique quilt, and I'm guessing that it was made in the 30s sometime. You'll see all the blocks are different. Some of the things that this quilt taught me was that you can use 2, 3, up to 10 fabrics in each of the blocks. This one is totally made from scraps. If you look a little bit closer, you'll see that the blocks that have the high contrasting fabrics in them are the best and most pleasing to look at. Then if you look over here at this one, you'll see that the pieces or the petals up in this area are mushing with the background and the flower is lost or the fan is lost. You only see the top and this part right in here. If you look over here at this block, the same thing happens, only you do have a contrast with the background, but these two fabrics are mushing together. So again, you learn a lot of things about the pattern when you look at this. When you look towards the bottom of the quilt, you'll see a block that has many prints in it. It looks like she's just put all of her scraps that were left from some of the others together. And that one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fabrics in that one. It's just where she placed the color that created the difference in that particular quilt. The next one that is directly behind me was created by Judy Block. Judy used just 3 fabrics in this one. She did like the one in the first quilt. She's connected all of the blocks together, but she separated them on the outside edge with side triangles. If you can remember the first quilt that I showed you, half of the Cleopatra's Fan was used to fill in this part of the block. And then she finished off on the outside of the quilt with a narrow border first and then a wider one on the outside edge. Another thing that Judy has done is quilted 1/4 of an inch from the edge of all of the pieces on her home sewing machine, which was really a nice ending to that quilt. The next one that I'm going to show you, also created by Judy Block. She did the table runner where she run the blocks at point in this fashion like this, and she's got really nice contrast between each of the pieces. It starts on the center with a small print here and then nice contrast in all of them. One thing about this pattern, it's best if you use small scale prints. They show up a little bit better in this design. The next one that I'm showing you was made by Cheryl Ann, the owner of Design Wall Company, and she has done a beautiful job choosing her fabrics for this quilt. She started in the center with a bright yellow print, which has some of the other colors like the blue and the greens in them, and then she's got a variety of textures, a little polka dot in here, a darker green, and I just love this blue in this quilt. She has made a square in the center by putting 4 blocks together, and out here she's stretched it out into a table runner with side triangles in here and finished off the corners of the quilt, or the ends I should say, with the block on each end. Above you'll see just a single block, which makes a beautiful pot holder or just a small table topper. You'll see another variation of this pattern. We have 4 of the single blocks separated by sashing through the center. This one was created by Judy Block, and something that she's done which is not seen real often is she has a real narrow border in here, then a little wider, again wider out here. On this one she has quilted in the ditch instead of 1/4 of an inch from each of the pieces, and then finished off the outside edge with just a stripe or a straight up and down effect here, and a little detail in the corners. One thing I forgot to mention about the quilting on the one that Cheryl Ann did, if you look closely at the quilting on this one, isn't that just beautiful how she's got feathers meandered in here, and again some swirlies up in here. I just love the detail that can be done with these patterns. I had a lot of fun creating the next version of Cleopatra's Fan. What I did was I got into my fat quarter stash. I started out in the center of the block with the red part of the block, and then I surrounded that with the green, and then when I ran out of that I threw in a little purple out here on the points, and you'll notice that there are 2 different orange prints, the one with the leaves and then the one that's plain, and then the same in a lighter gold. And then I surrounded the Cleopatra's Fan with a dark background. On the outside edge I have placed single blocks facing in to make a beautiful fall table runner. When I got to the quilting part, then I just stitched 1/4 of an inch from each of the edges inside, and I kept changing the color, going from the purple to the orange and the green and so forth. The next one that I'm showing you was created by Judy Block. She has arranged her blocks a little bit differently. You see that it's 3/4 of the center block here in the center of the table runner. She has separated, it actually looks like a broken Cleopatra's Fan because it has a light in here as well as on the outside of it, and then she's accented the points of each of the Cleopatra's Fan with that. The next one created by Judy, and it's a little bit distracting because I got another one underneath, so what I'm going to do is show it to you in this way when you see just the quilt. You see how she has put the square or a medallion in the center, and then off of each of the ends she has put the individual blocks. For a little bit of different quilting treatment, she has copied with tissue paper over Cleopatra's Fan and then stitched those lines in the blocks or the side triangles. The next one, done by Jody Harris, she has used just 3 colors in hers, and these are more subtle colors, the blues, the brown, and the browns, and then the lighter cream background. The last one in this group of quilts that I'm showing you is one where I've added some applique into the design. And in the background here, what I did was I took and I enlarged the print, or the leaves that were found in the burgundy print. I enlarged them on my computer, and then I created applique patterns, and I did a technique called Madeira applique, and those instructions are in great detail in the book for you to follow. It's really a fun, fast technique to use. So this one shows you what happened when you just do a long row down the center. Now I'm going to switch to another group of quilts. The first one's really cool. This one has stripes in the center. It's really fun to play with stripes and different textures when creating this pattern, because then you get a different look to the pattern. And here she is also separated out with a lighter print in here, and then gone out here with a darker one, and then hit each of the points with a red. And then her inside border has a stripe followed by another border on the outside. Here's another quilt done in a medallion way, and you'll see that the border print was probably the first fabric that Judy Block chose, and then she has put some darker green in here, and these two fabrics are the same texture and show off the design very, very well. This one she has quilted out at angles from each of Cleopatra's points for an interesting ending to this particular wall quilt. This quilt was unique and fun to do. I started out by choosing the large print in the burgundy when I was making this one, and then from there I added the green on the outside edge here and in the center, making sure that I separated the burgundy and the green, and I laid them or floated them on top of the cream background that also has those same colors in it. Because I ran out of fabric and I was in a Minnesota blizzard, I wanted to finish it, so I just went into my stash and found a plaid that I thought would go with the other fabrics and finished it off for what I called a real fun outside border addition. And then the binding on the outside edge I cut on a bias so it gave it a little texture on the outside edge of the quilt. Now we're going to show you how to cut and sew it together.
Inspired by Shar is sponsored by Brother. Featured in Shar's show is the Quattro, Creativity times 4. Embroidery, sewing, quilting, and crafting. The Quattro 6000D brings you 100 brilliant, unprecedented, new and improved features. The cabinetry used in this show is by Tracy's Tables, offering a complete line of tables, carts, and shelves custom-made to fit your specific needs. Visit them at tracystables.com. Olfa. There's an Olfa tool for every job.
Now is the fun part, when you start creating your own version of Cleopatra's Fan. I'm going to show you how easy it is to cut with these great acrylic templates that we've put together for you. A little bit about the templates. You'll see that, again, they are pink, transparent shapes. They all include the perfect 1/4-inch seam allowance in them. They're transparent so that I can move them around on the fabric if I want to do some fussy cutting. Some great things about the templates, you'll see that the ears are removed, and on each of the pieces when it's important, I did that to make it easier for you to match your points when you're putting the block together. Also, on all of the shapes, you'll see that the grain line is etched in. On this pattern, more than any other pattern, that's really important because you want the straight of grain on the outside edge of your block. All of these shapes have been laser cut and computer drafted, so they're very, very accurate and ready for you to use. On the back side of the templates, I have put little felt grips on them, and that will keep them from slipping when you do your cutting with the rotary cutter. The fabric grips are never taken off of the templates. They leave them on from one cutting to the next. You'll also notice something else that I've done with the grips. They start out to be a full circle, but then I trim them back so that they fill out the full corner of the template so that your fabric doesn't move at the end of your cut as you're cutting. There are 10 shapes in the block, and each of these shapes up here have their separate piece for cutting them out. But to break it down so that there's not so many pieces, when you look up here, you'll see that the block is divided in half. It is a mirror image. The right side is exactly a mirror image of the left. So we've just eliminated half of the pieces, and what we're going to do is fold the fabric in half when we're cutting so that you end up with a mirror image after the pieces are cut. So now we are dealing with just 10 shapes to create all of these pieces. The first fabric that I chose when making this one was the lighter background, which happens to be the one up in here. That one has the green, the red, and a little bit of gold in it. Then I've added a little bit of stripe in it for a little interesting effect, and you'll see a little later on when I start moving the blocks around how I take advantage of that stripe in the pattern. Something else that I did in this one today, in this particular block, is I've added a checkerboard pattern, which also adds interest to the block. I suggest that when you cut yours, you cut just enough for one block before you cut the whole quilt, and make sure that you like the placement of the color in your block. When I start to cut, the first thing I did was I folded the fabric in half and I matched up the selvage edges out here, and then I bifolded the strip up on top of the cutting board. Then I'm going to lay the ruler up on top, and I'm going to remove the uneven edge with the rotary cutter. After I've done that, then I'm going to turn the board and it's a good idea if you allow plenty of room for turning the board so that you don't knock stuff off the table. I usually find that I get myself crowded into a corner whenever I'm cutting a quilt. So probably clean off enough area to turn. You don't want your fabric hanging over the edge of the board, and you don't want to disturb that straightened edge. I'm going to cut this piece right in here. So what I do is I look at the straight of grain that's etched into the template and decide how I want to cut it from the fabric. So because this is going like this, you remember I said you want the straight of grain on the outside edge of your block. So I want to cut the strips wide enough to accommodate this piece, keeping in mind that I have the straight of grain. And this one I'm going to cut about 6 1/4 inches wide. And then we'll remove that strip of fabric. Now, to make it easier for me to cut these pieces, because there are so many different angles to this piece, I'm going to transport my cut strip onto a rotating mat board. And that really makes cutting a lot easier. So moving it up on top, again I will bifold that strip, making it a lot easier to work so I don't drag my fabric with me. Now lay the template up on top of that strip of fabric, and you're ready to start cutting. And I completely turn the board as I cut, making it easier to get around the shape. I'm using a small rotary cutter and following along the outside edge. When I get done with this first set of cutting, I will have a mirror image, or the right and the left side, identical to each other. And I would continue and do the other pieces just like that. I would do this one next, and then you can see down here there's one more of those pieces of that same fabric. The next thing I would probably do would be to cut this piece up in here, because that is to the point, and I like so much to start with that one because that gives me the beginning to go, and then from there I would add this color and fill this out in here. I wanted you to see how easy it is to do. I think I'd like to cut the striped one so that you see how I place the template on the striped fabric. So let's move to this fabric and see how we're going to place it on there. This one I didn't cut into strips first. What I did was I placed the template up on top of the fabric to make sure that I'm getting the straight of grain. So I'm looking at the stripe in the fabric and the arrow and matching that with it. Now there are some things about this pattern that you need to be cautious about because a lot of the shapes are the same. And there is a template C and J that look so much alike, and when I hold them on top of each other, they're almost identical. Well, to help you from getting confused, I've put letters on all of the templates from A to J. A will go to B, C, D, and E, F, G, H, I, and J, and that's the order in which you will actually sew the block together. So don't be worried about picking up the wrong pieces because they do have the letter on them. It's template C that has the striped fabric in it, and again I will place it up on top of the fabric. Like I said, line up the arrow on the template with the stripe, and we'll cut one of those. If you don't have a rotating mat, it probably helps to stand on the corner of your cutting table, or if you're good at cutting backhanded, you can do that as well, and that's what I just did to finish that one out. Now we have, of this particular piece, we have a mirror image or a right and a left side. And that's how I cut all of the pieces. Every single one of the shapes have to be cut with the fabric folded in half so that you have the right and the left side. And before I go to the sewing machine, I want to talk a little bit about construction so that you see how easy it is to go. And I think it's this pattern especially more than any other pattern, it's good to teach and reteach how the actual block goes together. When you look up on top here, you'll see that the block is broken into rows. So the outside row, actually in the book of instructions that comes with it, I say that there's 6 rows. The right 3 are a mirror image of the left. A goes to B, and then the next row is like this, and this is the last one that you sew in the middle. When you turn it over to the back side, you'll see that all of my seams are pressed open, and I'll do a little bit of clipping at the sewing machine so you'll see how that's done. Then after the rows are done like this, that's when you connect the rows. You have the 2 halves, and then the last seam that you do is down through the middle. Well, now it's time to go to the sewing machine and show you how to actually put the block together. I'm very proud of the book that comes with the templates when you purchase them. It has great graphics in it in color from beginning to end. Everything in here is shown to you not only from the right side as well as the wrong side, but I show you the actual size graphics, so when it's important to you, you're able to lay your sewing right up on top of it and see exactly what you need to do, step by step. Today I get to sew on a beautiful sewing machine by Brother. It's called the Quattro. It has wonderful features that I can't wait to share with you. This is an easy quilt to put together because of the curves are so gentle. When you look at them, you'll see that you can hardly even tell that there's a curved shape to them. The first 2 pieces that I'm going to put together are the A and the B piece. We're going to put them right sides together, and the first thing I'm going to do is match up the blunt edge over here. Something else that I want to point out, I'm going to flip this back over so that you can see something else. You'll see that there is a concave and a convex to these shapes, and I refer to them as a smile and a frown. This would be the smile piece, and this is the frown piece. It's so much easier to sew a curve if you have the smile on top, and that's this part right in here. What I did then was match up the beginning, putting the blunt edges together. We'll insert a pin there, and now I'm just going to move this over into a match over here. And again, we have a perfect beginning and a perfect ending because I know exactly where to put that pin. Now, because we have the smile on top, the bias edges of that smile just move into a perfect match. Something else that I want to point out about this, when you look at this piece from the side angle, you'll see that there's a point right here. I want to sew right onto that part right there, and I want to come off of the point on the bottom side. If you want to mark this point down here with a pencil, it's easier to find where you're supposed to end up sewing. All of my sewing is done with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. What I do is I take the shapes in the back of the book, which are laid out for you, and you'll see that there's a solid line on the outside edge and a dashed line which indicates the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Line up the outside line with the edge of the presser foot, drop your foot, and make sure that when you roll your needle down, it's inserted just outside the dashed line. That is called your scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. I do that because I want to make up for the fabric that's used in the seam allowance, which probably doesn't seem like a whole lot, but after you put a lot of seams together, it does add up. I like to start sewing on an anchor cloth, and the reason I do that is because I want the beginning stitches on my patchwork to be as strong as the other stitches sewn. So we'll sew to the edge of the anchor cloth, and then with the stiletto I will guide my fabric up to the presser foot, and you'll find that the stiletto is so great because your fingers are too big and you can't get them under the presser foot, so you have better control if you do it that way. And just pull the pins out as you work your way along the seam. Just a little reminder, when I get to this end of the seam, I want to come off the point. Remember, I pointed that out to you in the beginning. You can't probably see it, but if you lift it up, you'll see that there's a point from the bottom side. I'll turn it over and show you what I'm talking about. We'll clip our thread. That's one of the features that I like about the machine, is that it has a thread cutter, so when you get to the end of your sewing, you don't have to always pick up the scissor. Let me show you the back side of this piece so I can show you exactly the point I wanted to come off. This is it right here. When you do that, when I flip this back, you'll see that I have a nice straight edge on the outside edge of the block. That's really important that you have that. After you've done that, you clip into the seam allowance about 3 different places, and then I'm going to finger press that seam open. First on the wrong side. It doesn't seem like it's a whole lot of curve, but it does amount to a little bit, enough to where it's important. And then I would press with an iron. That is the outside row. Row 1 and 6 are identical to each other. The next row is done very much like the first one. You start at the top and put the smile on top, and this is a repeat of the first one, where you sew this curve right here and the one up here, remembering to match the beginning and the end of the seam, and taking advantage of those ears removed on the templates is really you're going to really enjoy that. When I look at the back side, you'll see that these also have been clipped open, or clipped I should say, before they were pressed open, and they lay really nice and flat. So we'll lay that one up there. That would be row 2 and 5. Now let's go into the middle of the block. This is where I'm going to spend a little bit more time because it's a little more intricate. And I'm going to start out by showing you how to put these two pieces together. So I'm going to grab a couple of pieces off of the design wall, and right sides together, we're going to match those up. And again, remember that we have that point that we want to come off of right here. If I were to flip it over, you would see that point right there. Then match the other end down here and put a pin there. Now you just gently move the two together so you have the edges matched. You don't have to stretch anything. If you have to stretch something, you have cut something wrong, because they are drafted so that they ease together so nicely. See, that's hardly a curve at all. Now, again, we'll start with an anchor cloth at the sewing machine. We'll sew to the edge of the anchor cloth. Also, I stop with the needle in the down position when I'm sewing. That way, I find it's easier to keep control of my fabric. Always controlling the fabric with the stiletto. You want to have those two edges always perfectly matched. This really is an easy pattern to do. It's intimidating to look at, but when you see how it's broken down into the simplest form, it's really not that hard to do. Now on this end, I want to sew off of this point right here. Never backstitch. If you backstitch, you'll just create bulk in the corners. So just go off into an anchor cloth. Another thing about backstitching, it's not important because these seams are going to be sewed over again. Now what I would do is I would clip these, press them open, and I've already done that step. But see how nice that looks? You have the nice straight edge there. I'll take one off of the table here that's already been pressed, and I'm ready to now put the next one on. You always take time to press with an iron when you're putting this block together. So now these are the next two pieces that are going together right in here. Now it doesn't look like they fit together until you actually place them right sides together. And remember, the smile is always put on top. So start out by matching the blunt edge there. Now this is one part where it's probably a little bit tricky or more complicated for you to look at, but if I show you step by step, you'll see. See how I match that edge down there? And then I'm going to turn it over to the other side after I have it completely pinned and show you exactly what I want it to look like on the other side. When I get to this part, I do something a little different, and I place the patchwork over my knee, and I use that to form this part of the pieces, and I gently move the curved edge to match the other pieces. And notice how the shape of your knee makes it so much easier to find the correct placement. You don't have to find the halfway mark. It just all moves into a perfect match. Also notice that I'm not stretching anything when I do this. I just kind of ease it over with my finger and make that perfect match. We'll put one more pin in. Now, for those of you that might find it hard to decide where you want to sew, I'm going to flip it over and show you from the other side what's important to know about this. When you look at this shape, you'll see that there's a point right down here. That is you want to sew off of that point, and you'll come up here and you go through here. That's also shown in great detail in the book. Make sure that you follow the step-by-step instructions. And that part of the instructions is shown to you in actual size, so you'll know exactly what you need to do. So now we'll sew that seam. Another thing, that tip that you might want to do, especially when you're just starting out, is putting a mark on your patchwork with a pencil so that you know exactly where you want to start sewing. I'm going to sew to the edge of the anchor cloth. I'll lift the presser foot and I'm going to flip the anchor cloth at an angle, at the same angle as the piece I'm going to sew on, and then I'm going to drop this down and we'll see if we can find that perfect point underneath there. It's a good idea not to sew over pins. So if you sew slow, but look at how nice that curve goes in. I have to agree that when I looked at this pattern and before I actually started sewing it together, I was intimidated too, but was really happy to see how easy it went together. It is effortless. Now I forgot to pull that pin out, but I think it'll be okay. It didn't hurt anything. And just gently scooching the fabric over with the stiletto as I work through the seam. Now when I get to the end of this seam, I kind of peek underneath to see where that point is. I hold my stiletto right there, and that's the point I want to come off of. Remember, I kept telling you how important that was. We're to the end of the seam, and now we'll go back onto the anchor cloth, and no back stitching ever. That just would create bulk in the at the beginning and end of the seam. So let's take a look and see if we actually hit that point. Yes, we got it right on where I wanted it. And let's look at the other end. Also a perfect beginning and a perfect end to that seam. Isn't that just great how that goes together? Now don't expect yours to be perfect the first time, because I have to admit mine wasn't, but using the tip of marking with a fabric marking pencil really works good. I am going to clip this curve and press it because I think this is an important part right here. We'll clip this a little bit. Take the time to press it open. We only have to show this step one time. We'll finger press it. You don't really need anything special for finger pressing, just using or being very aggressive with your pointer finger works really well. And this will prevent the wells in your seam line. Have you ever pressed a seam and found that you have little pleats in the seam line? Well, that's avoided if you finger press first. It takes a little more time, but it's worthwhile. Now this is the part that I want to show you. If you look closely here, you'll see that the 1/4 inch seam allowance is left there. Now you want that visible because you need that for later on in construction of the block. The next part of putting this block together is the 2 bottom pieces that go with this, and ahead of time I have sewn those together because it's just like the other curves, and again those are pressed open and clipped. Now this part is going to go on top of this one, and I want to remind you at this part of the block, everything has to be done in the order that I give it to you in the book. If you change the order of instruction, the block doesn't go together as nicely. So make sure you go step by step as I give it to you in the book. So now let's put these 2 right sides together. So again, with a smile on top, lay this one on top of here. And if you have a marking pencil, you could mark this part right in here where it comes off the point. And actually, I need to scooch that up just a little bit so it's perfect. Now, here comes a part. And again, this graphic is shown in actual size in the book. I want to insert a pin 1/4 of an inch from this edge and this edge over here. Not from the point down here, but from the two edges, right on the seam line. Then to the bottom piece, I want to insert a pin 1/4 of an inch from both edges there. And I'm going to twist this around so that that standing pin is in the place. I'll put another pin alongside of it to hold it, and now I can remove the standing pin. Then we'll finish pinning this. We'll put a couple more pins. I think that'll be sufficient. I like to work with silk pins or the tiny shaft because they're much nicer to work with. The larger the shaft, the less your accuracy will be. Now, before I sew the seam, I want to point out another feature about this particular area right here. You notice how there's a crevice right in here? That's the point that I want you to start sewing. So enter the patchwork right in this area and then continue to the other end coming off up in here. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to lower the presser foot in the back before I was going to start sewing. Now I want to sew. I sewed to the edge of the anchor cloth. Now I'm going to enter the patchwork right in that crevice, so I'll lift the presser foot and go up into there and guide the fabric with the stiletto. The lighting on this machine is so wonderful. I don't have to really have any extra lighting. It's got such a great, it's for what I would call mature eyes. Very nice lighting. Okay, now come off the point right here. And again, no reversing. We'll use the thread cutter, and we have that seam completed. Now let's take a look and see. Yes, exactly what I wanted. If you look closer at this, when I hold it, you'll see that we have now an intersection 1/4 of an inch from here. That's a very important part of this block because that's the point that I'm going to pin when I sew the rows together. So you do the same process on the other side of the block, and I won't have to repeat that for you, but that's how easy that part is. The next thing I'm going to show you how to do is to sew the rows together, which would be this area right in here. Now it looks like they're not going to match because it looks like you have the extended part here. They really don't match until you place them right sides together. So look at what happens now. A perfect match at the beginning and the end. But before we pin the beginning and end, I want to find a perfect match right in here. Something else about this seam, and I'm going to separate them like this so you can see what I'm talking about. The seam underneath is coming at this angle, and the one on top is coming at that angle. So it's making sort of an X. So what I need to do is be very careful and pin that seam line perfectly on the seam in the seam allowance. So through the top, insert a pin right on the seam line, and then go to the bottom one.
No one has that shot.
Just come in. I don't know if that's it either, is it?
That has it. Rick, you got it. That you're going to pin.
You can work out just a little bit more, out that way.
There.
Yeah.
What do I say, Val?
You are going to pin, you're going to put the pin, you're telling me how you put it through that.
Now to match the seam, I want to insert a pin on the seam line through the top and through the bottom, right on the seam line, 1/4 of an inch from the edge. This pin is left standing until I insert another pin alongside of it. And it's easier to have pins if they have a little glass head on them. It's easier to pick them up. So okay, now we have that pin, but before I take it out, it's a good idea to put a mark where that pin went into the fabric so you know exactly the point that you want to sew over. That will give you that perfect intersection when you press the seam open. Now you can pin at the beginning and the end, matching up this corner just like that, and we're ready to sew. And I don't know what I did with my anchor cloth, but that's okay. We'll do this seam without one. We'll see if it does a good job. We want to come right on that point. Again, guiding the fabric so you have the edges matched. Remember, I want to sew right over the point that I made with the pencil mark so that I have that perfect intersection. When we get to the bottom, again, a little reminder that we want to come right off the point, right down here. Don't have to remember this because it's all shown in the book for you to follow. Let's see how we did. That one's perfect on the top. Wow. That's a great intersection right there. We have a perfect match in there, and when you look down here, everything makes a nice straight line. Now I'm going to pull another step down that's already been pressed and ready to put together. It's just like the one I did over here, but it's ready to go. And what you would do is pin these two parts, just like I did this one, right through the seam line. Put them right sides together. Insert the pin on the seam line through the top and the bottom, and then the beginning and end, and you would have a perfect seam there. The last seam that's done in this block is the center seam, which goes through this part right up in here. And I'm going to take those two down so that you can see how to put those together. When you look closely, you'll get a good look at that intersection that I want to match this one to that one. I also want to match these two up here and the one down here. So right sides together. I want to insert a pin 1/4 of an inch or right on that intersection where the two fabrics come together through the top and through the bottom piece right on that seam line. Let that pin stand while you insert the next pin. And the point that that pin comes out of, or this intersection right here, is the one that you want to sew over. To match these up here, do the same thing, insert it through the top and the bottom right on the seam line, leave it standing, and pull that pin out, and we repeat that, and you would sew that seam right down the center. Again, you would finish off by pressing that seam open. I want to take you to a larger design wall and show you some of the possibilities for layouts that you have when finishing your quilt. Now you're going to begin to see how effective the stripe is in the blocks. The first variation that I have put up here, I have laid the blocks out so everything is evenly distributed, starting out with the medallion in the middle and then off to all four sides. I have a repeat of that, only half of the block here. Then up in the corner I have one facing in. Very, very interesting effect. Now I'm going to show you what happens when I start turning the blocks. This is the fun part, to see what other designs you can create by just twisting and turning them a little bit. So now we'll turn this one like this, and we'll turn this one like this, and like this. And we'll get a whole, have I got it just right? No, I gotta turn this one, and we'll turn this one like that. Now when you take a look, it's a totally different effect just by changing the placements of the blocks. The next one that I'm going to do, I'm going to turn just the center ones to the inside like that. And you would actually have 4 separate medallion blocks, and these could be separated from each other with a little bit of sashing for a different look. It's unbelievable all the possibilities that you would have just in moving the blocks around and creating your own designs. Remember, take time to do this so that you're happy with the finished product when you're done. I sure hope you've enjoyed watching Inspired by Shar today, and join us next time when I show you a lot more techniques with another quilt pattern. We'll see you then.